So tonight we've got the candidates all assembled for you here, and you can listen to what they've got to say about the future of our library in South Norwood. As a brief recap for people, the council has currently put forward 4 possible options for the future of the Croydon Library Service. And those 4 options are a community-run library, which would be run at cost neutral to the council, reducing the hours across the library service, outsourcing of the whole library service to a social enterprise, or indeed the closing of 5 library sites, including our library here in South Norwood. But we don't think any of those options are good enough, not least the outsourcing or effective privatisation of our public libraries. This was not put on the table in the first stage consultation, so we simply don't know what that would mean in practice for our library here in South Norwood. And when the council makes its decision, it effectively means they'll be making that choice based on a flawed, incomplete, and potentially invalid consultation process. So none of the options on the table are good enough at the moment. We've decided to put forward our own proposal of a way forward for the library here in our community. And shortly I'll hand over to Libby, the chair of Friends of South Norwood Library, to talk about our proposal. Libby's going to speak for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Mary, and she's going to run a structured Q&A with our party candidates for a period of time. Those candidates we have joining us tonight, we have from the Conservatives, Sonia Marinello and Michelle Kazi. From the Green Party, we have Ria Patel and Peter Underwood. We have as independent candidates, Jane Nichol and Ian Bone, who will be joining us via video message. We have Labour Party candidates, Louis Casarides and Mike Bonello. From the Lib Dems, we have Andrew Rendell. From the Take the Initiative Party, we have Angela Kayla and Alison Johnson. And we also have a statement from another independent candidate, Mike Samuel, which I'll read out at the end of the Q&A session. There are biographies for all of our speakers tonight in the email that's been sent round with the link for the event. So if you want to know who's who, check out the bios on the email. After we've done the Q&A with Mary, we'll move to an opportunity for you to speak to the candidates yourselves and put your questions forward. And please, throughout as candidates are talking, please be putting your questions in the chat box to one side. I will make sure that I'm reading those and cataloguing them, and then we'll come to put those questions to the councillors. To the candidates, sorry. We will keep you on mute throughout the session and then unmute you when we want you to ask your question. So yeah, please wait your turn, but we will try and get around every question that is raised. Just a final point about as a reminder to the speakers, we want to keep your answers brief and to the point, so we give everyone a chance to have their voice heard. So we'll be keeping candidates to a 2-minute maximum time limit on responses to questions. And for anyone asking a question, please make sure it is a question and not a statement. We want to keep people focused so we can learn as much as we can about the candidates' views on our library. So that's the agenda. We've got the councillors slide up there with all the people speaking tonight. That's it for introductions and the ground rules. I'm now going to hand over to Libby, and she can talk us all through the proposal. So Libby, do you want to take it away?
Thank you very much, Jacob. That was brilliant. So if we go forward to the slide that is the whistle stop slide, so it's one after this. I'm going to go really quickly, just in case anybody isn't aware of the facts of what's going on. So whistle stop summary. November 2020, Croydon Council declares bankruptcy and also announces the potential closure of 5 of our 13 libraries. December 2020, South Norwood residents protest on the 5th of December, and the Friends of South Norwood Library is formed. January 2021, the library service launches the first stage of the consultation with 2 options presented to the community. The first is to close those 5 libraries, and the second is for the community to come up with cost-neutral models for each library. So that then ended in March. And at that point, we sent a counter proposal, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that is neither closure nor a cost neutral model. Then the library service wrote a report, and that report suggested 4 options. So the 4 options that Jacob has touched on: closing the 5 libraries, reducing opening hours across all libraries. So bear in mind that when the first stage of the consultation was done, if you lived near Norbury Library, you wouldn't think that it was affecting your library at all, so you might not have got involved. But as a result of that consultation, now the second option is to reduce opening hours across all libraries. The third is outsourcing all libraries to a social enterprise. Greenwich Library, can't remember what the last L is for, but so there is, so that is the third option. And then the fourth option is what the library service is still terming community run libraries. So moving really swiftly forward, if we could move on to the next slide. There we go. So our counter proposal, we felt like we had to put forward a counter proposal because literally nothing that the council was suggesting was in any way workable for our community. So our community in South Norwood, as to be honest, is similar in a lot of the communities affected right across Croydon, is that we do not have a large, retired, wealthy population who have free time to run a lovely community library. What we have is a lot of working age families with small children who are having to balance and juggle a lot of different things. We've got a lot of children in our borough. We've got a lot of economic deprivation and digital deprivation. So basically what we don't have is a community that is able to take on running a library, never mind if morally they should or they shouldn't. So our proposal was significantly different. Our proposal was that the council continues to fully fund and run the library service. And we have a number of red lines, as you can see from the slide, which include professional staffing with qualified library workers, the same opening hours, access to the library's management system and the buying power. So this means that you're not in a situation where you're having to buy books in a more expensive way, which seems mad to me. And then maintaining and providing all of the computer and self-issue machines and all the hardware and the Wi-Fi. The reason why we have put into our proposal the demand that the opening hours stay the same is because South Norwood Library is open for 4 days a week. 3 days a week, it is closed. So that happened after the privatisation of the Croydon Libraries in 2010. And the result of it, the direct result of it, which you can see statistically, is that user numbers dropped drastically. What happens is if your library is open less often, fewer people will go because they don't know when the library is going to open, they can't rely on it. So we believe that at the absolute minimum, the library should be open 4 days a week. And it really should be open more. So if those terms are met, we have offered to take on managing the building via a community asset transfer, income generation, using private hire, hot desk subscription and subleases in areas that are either not used by the library or not used by the library at certain times. And also to target fundraising that wouldn't be available to the council because the library is a statutory service. So if we were able to take it on as a community group, we could target fundraising that, that the council couldn't. But I should underline, this is not something that the Friends of South Norwood Library want to do. We did not decide that we wanted to dedicate hours and hours of our time to making that happen. What we want is for the council to continue to run our library. And this is, failing all else, the only other truly workable solution that we could come up with. So what's going to happen next? Just to run down what's going to happen next so that everybody's totally informed, we're going to move to the next slide. And okay, so the 17th of May is going to be a really, really important date. The 17th of May is when the first stage of the consultation, the report from that, is going to be presented to the Cabinet of Croydon Council. And they will be asked to reduce down the 4 options to 2 in order for the second stage of the public consultation to happen. So if you remember, the 4 options are community run, which we don't support. We are not proposing community run libraries. We are proposing that the council runs the libraries. I think a really important thing to factor in here is a knowledge of the other organisations offering to run the libraries in a community run model. A number of them are religious organisations offering to run the library on religious premises, which goes completely against the idea of libraries being free and accessible for everybody, because there are people who feel that religious organisations are not welcoming to them for one reason or another. So community run, closing the libraries, which obviously we don't want, reducing the hours, which again is just going to lead to a drop in library usage, and outsourcing to a social enterprise, which is basically privatisation. And that has happened before. In 2010, Croydon Libraries, when the Conservatives were running the council, Croydon Libraries were outsourced to Carillion, and they had to be taken back in-house because Carillion went into bankruptcy and the libraries were very, very run down. So, so basically, we don't support any of those 4 options as they stand. So then what happens after that May 17th Cabinet meeting is that on May 25th, the second stage of the public consultation is going to begin. What's really important is that this time around, as opposed to last time, there's going to be an equalities impact assessment, which means that you can see the huge impact on equalities in our community that closing our libraries is going to have, and also a report from the social enterprise GLL about how they would propose to run Croydon Libraries. So those 2 things are going to be really important pieces of information. Then on the 6th of July, the second stage of the consultation is going to end. A report is going to be drawn up for Cabinet. And either that's going to be rushed into the Cabinet meeting on the 12th of July, and a decision is going to be made, which is, frightening in itself to think that such a huge momentous thing would be rushed, but the whole consultation has been rushed, or because of the referendum about whether Croydon is going to have a directly elected mayor, it will go to the Cabinet meeting in October. So that is the kind of timetable that we're looking at. So then, just to finish off, I really want to underline this for everyone so that we know this. I'm going to move on to the reasons why a library is absolutely essential, just so that everybody's clear. So if we move on to the next slide. So this is just because I've been to Cabinet meetings, or I've viewed Cabinet meetings and scrutiny meetings where people are questioning what a library is for. So it's really essential that everybody understands this. It's massively underestimated. It is the only safe space in our community where you don't have to pay to access it, but it can take you to incredible places and give you amazing opportunities that fight inequality. So homework space for children who don't have a desk at home. There are a lot of them in South Norwood. Free access to computers. There are a huge number of people who do not have access to computers. When South Norwood Harris Academy did their first lockdown, only 40% of the students had a computer to work on at home. So they could not do digital learning at that point with the children. Access to printers. These are really essential things for low-income families in our community. Digital literacy. That's how you create equality for older people who were not part of the computer revolution as we were. Income inequality. All these things fight income inequality. And free Wi-Fi. Free Wi-Fi is a hugely underestimated resource. People on a tight income cannot pay £30 a month for the privilege of accessing Wi-Fi in their own home. That is a huge amount of money for someone on a fixed income. So it brings our community together. These are the amazing things about a library. So there's an ancestry club, which is really popular with older people and accesses ancestry.com for free through the library. A book group, it's a community space. There are 6 baby and toddler groups that go on when the library is open in South Norwood. And those groups start what is a lifelong reading journey. Now, reading is one of the things that most fights inequality, because what you're doing is you are arming people with the knowledge of how to access information. And once someone knows how to access information, they know how to educate themselves. This is huge. The library offers learning opportunities. It offers opportunities for better mental health, because believe me, reading is good for your mental health. And it enhances life opportunities. And this is really, really important right now, because we are about to go into post-COVID recovery. There are a lot of people who are going to be looking for jobs. And the library is a brilliant place to do that. It's a place where you don't have to be scrolling on your phone. You can calmly use the Wi-Fi, use the equipment, print things out, make your applications. It's a safe place for those who've been sheltering to re-enter our community and feel part of it. It helps you to access council services. Now, this is vitally important, especially if you are about to become a councillor, but you know in South Norwood, the library is the only place where you can go in person and talk about accessing council services. And it gives you health information. So GPs literally prescribe books from the library. So anyway, that's why libraries are vitally important. I'm going to stop talking and get down to what our candidates think. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Libby, for that overview of the proposal. We're now moving on to the Q&A session with the candidates. So I'm going to hand over to Mary, who's going to lead us through this stage of the evening. And then, as a reminder, we'll come back to questions from the audience after that. So please keep putting your questions in the chat box. And over to Mary.
Thank you, Jake. I'd like to welcome everybody who's come tonight, and our candidates in particular. This is the only hustings that is happening in this election campaign. As far as I know, it's the only big public meeting and chance for ward constituents to question the candidates. So basically the parties have been having a quiet time of it, and for reasons that we all know, obviously social distancing, lockdown is ending, people are socialising again. But these ward elections are incredibly important because they're the first elections since the council went bankrupt. So I'm very glad that we've been able to create this opportunity. Things couldn't be more urgent for the library service itself, because as Libby has said, on May the 17th, the council will decide if they're going to close 5 libraries, and they will vote on which options they're going to take to the next phase of what still feels like a very tokenistic and rushed consultation. I want to set a few ground rules because we've got a lot of people and not much time. So we've got about 50 minutes and then we'll go to public questions. And I'm very, very keen that we do that. So please be thinking of your questions as the candidates are speaking. I'm going to ask 4 or 5 questions and I will direct them to 3 or 4 people each time. If you're not one of them and really feel that you've got something to say, then please raise your hand in the chat and we'll see if we can come to you. And as Jake said earlier, please aim to speak for 2 minutes, because if you go over, we will need to mute you. Everybody has made the effort to put themselves forward. So I would really urge you, I hope that people will not resort to point scoring and standard party lines. I would urge everyone to bring some thoughtfulness to this, because it's very clear that we face really nothing but bad options in Croydon for the foreseeable future, and for the library, for all services, but for the library service certainly. So the first question, and I hardly want to ask it, but I think it has to be asked, is about the causes of the funding crisis. and why are we in this situation, and what's your solution to it? Why should we actually vote for you in a landscape of cuts? And I'm going to put that first to Sonia Marinello, who's Conservative candidate for South Norwood, then to Louis Casarides, Labour candidate for South Norwood, and then to Andrew Rendell, who's standing for the Lib Dems in Woodside. So Sonia, first of all, what is the cause of this problem? I mean, surely many people would actually say it is the fault of the Conservative Party. It's the fault of Conservative cuts over many years. What's your view, and why should we trust you to defend us in such a harsh environment of austerity?
Thank you, Mary. Firstly, I don't accept the criticism that it would be because of Tory cuts. It's quite simply a fact. There are many other Labour councils in London that have not declared bankruptcy. So there's something quite clearly wrong with Croydon Labour, because they have mismanaged funds, and it's quite obvious that brick by brick is one of the reasons people who are ill qualified to make decisions about investments, they invested a lot of public money, 200 million. In fact, I mean, looking at the other library that was built a few roads away from the old library, I mean, that was partly built with brick by bricks developers. So the causes of the financial crisis and the bankruptcy we find ourselves in are because of Croydon Labour's mismanagement of funds, not because of Tory cuts. The facts speak for themselves on that point. Why should you trust me? I have spent my career helping people, and I fundamentally believe in the library service, and I fundamentally believe in how much an important service it is to low-income families. I accept that if I was elected, the overall control of the council would not change. But I promise you that if I was elected, I would be a voice for you, and I would be championing this cause, because it's a library that has to remain for South Norwood.
Thank you. Louis, over to you. That's fair criticism, isn't it? That Labour has been extraordinarily incompetent in Croydon. We've got a monument to Labour's incompetence in the form of a empty library that's never going to open, right in the middle of South Norwood Station Road. What's your response to that? Can you unmute yourself?
Sorry, I'm just unmuting myself. Sorry about that. So first, I just want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to speak with residents. I think it's so important that people have access to candidates and are able to question them. I think that's very healthy for democracy, so thank you. I think firstly, there's a bigger picture, and there's also secondly, a more localized picture. So the bigger picture is, it is a fact that Labour inherited £720 million of long-term debt from the Tory administration up until 2014. So half of this debt comes from the Tory administration in Croydon. But we've also had 76% of central government funding cuts in that time as well. For every £1 we used to get, we now get 25 pence. Also, Croydon is funded as an outer London borough. If we were a city, we would be the 12th biggest city in the UK. But as it stands right now, we are an outer London borough, and we get £25 million less a year than the lowest funded inner London borough in London. So we are chronically underfunded, and we are savagely cut. Also, the cost of COVID, there's been an expenditure shortfall. So COVID has cost the council £79.3 million. The government has given us 41.9 million back. So Croydon is short. We have been shortchanged £34 million. So to suggest that this has nothing to do with the Conservative government, frankly, I think is completely disingenuous. Now, I want to be genuine. I also think locally, and by the way, it's not just Croydon. We had Northamptonshire County Council, which was a Tory administration, gone in bust. Kent, Leeds, Manchester and Nottingham councils have also warned that they have to reduce staff and cut services unless the government steps in. So there's a much bigger picture here, and it's a chronic situation across the UK, instigated by the Tory government.
Yeah.
But locally,
Louis, can you
yes,
move on and tell us how you would represent
yes,
ward constituents in an environment when the Labour run council, the Labour
Yes.
Party, the platform you're standing on, is
Yes.
implementing cuts and wants to close South Norwood Library.
So what I think is really important is that I think as we have a new leadership now in the council, we are very keen to be open and responsive to residents. It's about being transparent. One thing I'll do is call on open data to make data as publicly available as possible, as far as legally available. We also need to bring residents like yourself into the decision-making process. Now, you said something that struck me, and you said you felt the consultation was rushed and disingenuous. We need to look at that. You need to have a genuine say in these decisions. Councils work best when they're doing things with their community and not doing things to their community. We are very lucky to have such passionate people, such passionate residents, and people like yourself. Thank you. You should not be doing this. I understand that, but thank you.
Right, thank you.
And we need you to have a genuine say.
I really want to emphasise this is not what we want to be doing.
No.
We don't want to be fighting to save a library, but we are. Andrew Renzel, you have been a Labour councillor. You're now standing for Woodside for the Lib Dems. Presumably you know the Labour group quite well. What's your feeling about the causes of these problems, and how would you defend your ward constituents if you're elected?
Okay, I think it's too easy to say there's one reason for the financial situation. Yes, the Labour administration have made mistakes. The Labour administration were left a large black hole by the previous administration. As far as central government funding goes, we're funded 20th out of 32 London boroughs. So Louis is quite right that we are chronically underfunded by central government. And of course, then there's COVID. But so we've got these problems, but it's just blaming one side or the other, probably not going to solve any problems. So what we've got to do is work on the ground. Now, as a former councillor, I represented Ashburton Ward, was instrumental in getting Ashburton Hall back up and running, and that as a community asset for the community to use. So I've got some experience there, and we started that campaign when I was in opposition. I think a big thing would be doing what we can, whoever's elected, with not a lot of time, to get this proposal as one of the options that the cabinet can consider and look at bringing forward. So that would be a lot of lobbying to try and get that on the actual table. And myself as well, as similar to Louis, I've been a caseworker for an MP as well. So I know how to help the community get things done and throw my full weight and support behind. I think this is a very good proposal, because what you've done is, as a group, is actually come up with a feasible option to keep the library open and the statutory service up and running. So I applaud you for that. So that's what I would do if elected on the 6th.
Okay, thank you. I can't emphasize enough that our proposal at the moment is sitting in a hopper in the council. We're not really hearing anything that suggests that the council wants to move on this on the kind of timeframes that they have got in their consultation. That we certainly would not accept being handed the keys in October and said, you know, here you go, because the red lines that we've put in, the sole reason for our proposal is to protect the library service. So those red lines are red lines. We want the full extent of the existing service, and there would be an awful lot to talk about. So I think if anyone says they support this proposal, I think that they need to understand just how much work there would be to do. Just before I want to move on to the question of kind of what library services are for and what they provide for us. But just before we do, on this question of the fiasco of the 2 libraries, the empty building on the High Street, and the existing library, this speaks to what Louis raised about openness and transparency, because the council has given some figures that are quite puzzling, and Angela Kaler perhaps you could address this. The council has said that the existing library needs £400,000 of work over 20 years. Well, we've had different timeframes from them on that, and that the new library needs £800,000 of work. Now, I know you work in the property sector. What's your response to that? What's your take on that? Hello, Angela, could you unmute?
I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So my view is that that those figures are overinflated. Having worked in the property industry for, well, almost 20 years, as I said to you at the protest on Saturday, we could put up 2 new build houses fully kitted out from the ground up for that cost, and we're not having to rebuild a whole new library here. You know, it's got existing stock within it in terms of the books and so forth. So where that cost is coming from, I don't know. So I'd love to actually have your photos, as you said, that we could receive, so that we can actually speak to, you know, get another opinion onto what the cost would actually be, so we can actually work with the information and then work towards a solution to keep our library open, because, you know, we are very much so in support of your proposals as well, and would be happy to work alongside, you know, either one of your options. You know, they all seem viable to me.
Okay, thank you. So you don't regard those figures as those figures from the council as particularly realistic or sensible? No, they're overinflated, I think you said.
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, Andrew Rendell has disappeared from Green and muted himself. The reason for that is that he has to put his kids to bed because there's a medical emergency in his family, and he did let me know about it in advance. So so I hope you'll be able to rejoin us soon. So I want to move on. I think libraries are very often regarded as a kind of soft secondary service compared to, say, housing, and something that it's perhaps not, you know, not so serious to cut. And I'd like to probe this a little bit. And we're actually very lucky because we've got an awful lot of people here among our candidates who have been involved in education in one way or another, who are school governors or have been school governors. And so I want to just put this question first to Alison Johnson, and then to Mike Bonello, and to Ria Patel. So Alison, can you say what, you know, why do you feel that libraries are important, and how important is reading and imagination for development and well-being in young people? I know that you have worked with children who've been excluded from offenders, so perhaps you could give us your views on that. And you need to unmute.
Sorry, you know, you're revved up, ready to go, and then you don't unmute. Thank you very much, Mary. Wonderful presentation, Libby. I was clapping. I don't know if you saw. Right, just to keep it brief, I think there is being a trivialisation of the impacts potentially of the library closing, whether in South Norwood or the other 4 proposals for closure, and in light of some of the things that Libby's already mentioned in terms of, as a ward, Woodside, the socio-economic deprivation that already exists, the education outcomes for children in the ward are significantly below many of the other wards, especially in the south of the borough, and also about the digital deprivation. But when I think about some of the work that I've done personally, it's about even single mums, where they make arrangements with their children when they leave school that they can go and be in a safe place, which at this time would be that library, and they can wait there until mum in that safe environment can get homework done, can access digital resources, and again, as I said, they're in a safe place until mum can turn up. I think about the kind of social isolation issues which have been intensified by the pandemic, and about the kind of space where you don't have to be alone, but you can sit quietly in a corner, read a newspaper, again, which is provided free of charge, and you can still be in the company of others. I think about disadvantaged children and young people for who's going to Waterstones on a Saturday and buying books at £9–10 per book, if for a paperback, that if we got rid of the library, are we waving goodbye? And we would be waving goodbye to the future educational outcomes for these children. And if I think, and I was trying to look it up, about what is that many can have printers, they may have a laptop potentially in the home, but the cost of running that printer is quite something else. And I think all of the clubs, even things for mother and baby, all of those kind of early experiences about accessing learning, and about just understanding how libraries work, and the treasure chest, that's what I'm going to call it, that indeed they are. It would be an absolute travesty to trivialise it as though it's just a few books in a building. Why not? Absolutely against it. And I would be very much advocating, not only do you persist with your proposal, but in fact even seek some legal advice to challenge the council about the viability, actually, or the authenticity of its consultation process, and actually then cause press the pause button, so in fact they can't rush ahead with it in the timeline that they're suggesting. That would be my suggestion, because you're quite right, Mary, you shouldn't have to, no resident should have to now, post-pandemic, and however that's going to look like, having to be worrying about keeping a library open, which in fact is an essential service and has been for many years, and why should we have to turn around? I saw a gentleman with it on Saturday, and the question on his board was, what is a library, mummy? I mean, may we never be in that situation. Children in South Norwood and the other wards, Woodside, they deserve to have access to these kind of facilities. Thank you.
Right. I want to go to Mike Bonello. Mike, you've suddenly gone blurry. Are you? Hello?
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 Hi.
So Mike, can you tell us why you think libraries are important? It's disappeared.
I apologise for wiggling it about. Hello everyone, thank you for organising that. Libraries are, the previous speakers have spoken about a connection to the libraries with education. I come from a social care perspective, and I thought, there's a certain link, as Alison was speaking about as well, from I guess her role. By saving on a library, it's a it can be seen, and I'd see it as a preventative service. If we give our young people a sense of identity in the place that they live, and that enriches the environment, and that means that people have a sense of fulfillment that can hopefully serve towards those young people feeling a helplessness that I think exists. Young people are drawn to, they've got serious youth violence on the streets that's disproportionately affecting, our communities, and it's necessary that we keep a service in place that may prevent that. Everything is about cutting, and that's not why libraries are important, but the whole of our community will be the poorer for the closing of a library, because it helps it helps young people, children. So it's important, that it's necessary that we have a library here.
But Mike, I have to ask you the obvious question, as you're standing for the Labour Party. If you are elected, will you vote with the Labour group? You're a child protection social worker. As you've just said, libraries are part of preventative services. They're a really important safety net for children and young people. So would you be voting with the Labour group potentially to close South Norwood Library? What?
I will not support the closure of the library. I will not vote to support the closure of the library.
So what is your stance on this?
as I said, it's necessary that South Norwood as a library, when I say South Norwood in this context, I mean the two wards together. You know, Woodside's, most people think of where it's here, Woodside is South Norwood. So we're like an autonomous area. I mean, it's necessary, it's a focal centre. People move in South Norwood to an area which is the heart of our area. And it's, so in terms of, so I won't support a proposal that means that the place that hopefully I'll be elected to represent. But why are we facing this? That's the thing, because Hamida Ali, the leader of our council, is faced with a situation. 76%. If I lost that 76% of my income, he said, right, you've got to fund child protection, older adults, people with learning disabilities, people with mental health, as well as rubbish and fly tipping. And you've got to make 78% cuts. Where do they fall? That's where we have been put by this government. That is what that is the thing.
Right. Okay. Well, we'll come back to the question of the library consultation and the different options on the table.
Sorry.
But
yeah,
we've covered some of that ground, so let's move on. Michelle Kazi has her hand up, and Ria Patel is also going to answer this question. So Ria, could you tell us where you stand on this?
Thank you. Yeah, I used to cherish times in the library as a child. I used to go there most days, kind of after school, to pick up books to read. And kind of this is Sanderstead Library as well, which is another library that the council have proposed to shut down. I also spent time volunteering there, and the fact that volunteers are necessary to run a library is another story. Anyway, but through A-levels, I spent most days after school in the library revising, and most of my friends did the same. But I also had to travel outside of Croydon to access the library because Croydon libraries weren't open late enough when I had a lot of work to do. And even currently, with libraries not being open due to COVID, as a student at university, I've been finding it hard to manage doing work. And I've even made friends at the library, and kind of this social aspect of libraries really shouldn't be overlooked. And it's heartbreaking that kind of Croydon Council wants to shut down this library and the 4 others as well. Libraries are hubs for communities, and they give people access to safe spaces for education, and you're able to read and pick up fantastic books there. Public services shouldn't be private, they shouldn't be privatized, and this includes libraries. They should be properly publicly funded, not privately funded, and not community libraries. The consequences of having access to these really good public services like libraries are really important and vast in terms of kind of providing one form of a preventative method, well-being, and kind of community growth. And they give like safe spaces for all members of the community, from children and students to even older adults. And they allow spaces for community groups, and more spaces like this are needed in communities. And opening hours.
And as a Green Party candidate, what would, if you're elected, what would you be doing to defend the library service?
I mean, you shouldn't have to be running this campaign in the first place. I do everything I can to save this library and the 4 others as well, and kind of not compromise, without compromising on kind of opening hours as well. There needs to be open for people who need access to a safe space to work, learn, printing, computers.
Right.
And
okay. Thank you very much. I just want to move on so that Michelle gets a chance to speak.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I had my hand up because I feel quite passionate about this as someone in teaching as well. I love libraries because of the inspiration they give me, because I'm a creative person, and a lot of kids that I teach English language, poetry composition, and so on. So libraries are the place where I personally find I get the most inspiration for composition, and so do my students in most of my lessons. And I think that element, that artistic creative element, is something that people always forget about. I know we focus a lot on sciences and community spaces, but libraries also inspire creativity, which I think we need, especially as times are so dire with COVID. And I also like to say, I don't think it's productive blaming each other about what's happened. I think the only productive way forward is working with the community, trying to inspire the people who live in South Norwood and Woodside, and just doing our best to keep this open. And I think that should be the way forward for all of us, instead of being toxic and putting the blame on each other.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, something I want to talk about the post-COVID environment and post-COVID recovery, and the role of the library in that. Because something I hear quite a lot from people in South Norwood, and I'm sure that all of you will be hearing this on the doorstep, is that South Norwood always seems to lose out. And certainly the fact that we can be promised a new library and potentially end up with no library does seem to confirm that. But I want to talk a bit about how important the library is, just to and to talk about one of our supporters, Joanne Older, who's is a very buoyant and determined person, but like many people in South Norwood, she's on a low income and she doesn't have Wi-Fi at home. I've had the experience actually quite often when I go to the library or past the library, there'll be somebody sitting outside trying to get online, sitting on the doorstep, literally trying to get online, or sitting on the bench outside the library using the Wi-Fi, even though the library is now closed, and sort of piggybacking off the Wi-Fi. And you know, my question to you really is, if the council is allowed to close South Norwood Library or cut the service, what would you say to Joanne? Because she lives opposite the new library. She was looking forward to it opening. She's got no Wi-Fi or phone at home because that's too expensive a service. She completely relies on the library, and she has, in lockdown, and I think this is true of lots of people, she has struggled to do job applications on her phone. She's felt herself incredibly disadvantaged in some of those complex first round interviews for job applications, first round tasks, because she's had to do them on her phone. She's had to submit video on her phone. And she also is a recovering addict, so she is struggling to access support services. And if South Norwood Library were to shut, she would have to walk 45 minutes at least. In fact, I would say that walking to Thornton Heath or to Croydon Central is probably 45 minutes for someone who's fit and healthy, and many people are not fit and healthy. Louis, what would you, there's a particular aspect here as well, that the library consultation has focused on digital apps, and I think that you know, we've heard in the course of the consultation that an awful lot of services can be provided by internet shops or on digital apps, and their flavour of the month, moving services to digital apps, is part of Croydon Council's project for weathering the current financial crisis. So what is your opinion on that? Would you be, you know, going along with, or how would you see this embrace of digital, and what would you say to Joan?
I mean, what can you say? There are so many people. I mean, I've lived in Croydon my whole life. I was born and raised in South Norwood. I grew up in South Norwood High Street, and I myself went to South Norwood Library as a child when I was younger. I mean, I've seen firsthand how beneficial and how important libraries are. It's about having the opportunity to broaden your horizons. It's about going to a safe space. So many kids grow up in Croydon, living in dangerous housing environments and so many other aspects to their lives. And libraries are, you know, they're books and they're important. What do you say to someone like that who you know, the reality of cuts is that it always hits the most vulnerable people, and that's just not fair. And that's why we need to invest in our community.
I don't think that's what Joan wants to hear, is it? I think she knows that.
She wants to hear that the library is going to be saved. She wants to hear that, and this is where I'm particularly concerned within the consultation, that there's only a a 6-day gap from the 6th to the 12th. And what we need to do is really expand this consultation and genuinely consult the community. That, you know, that has to be the starting point, and we need to look at viable options. You've proposed one. I even spoke with Oliver Lewis the other day, and he's happy to meet with you and personally discuss that with you. And this is what we need to do. We need to map out a way where we all come together and discuss how we can save this library, because at the end of the day, it's the most vulnerable people who suffer.
Right. Peter Underwood, what I'd like to come to you. What is the Greens policy on saving public services?
I think the first thing we need to go back, as you said, you shouldn't be fighting this battle. Why the council have decided to cut £500,000 from the library budget, there's no explanation from that. There hasn't been honesty about the complete council accounts, but even a quick skim through, I could find plenty of other areas. You could cut £500,000, you could leave the library budget completely intact. So we should be keeping the libraries open. For example, senior staff at the council are still getting paid their hyperinflated salaries. Even if you applied that 15% cut to everybody earning over 80,000, you'd save £1 million, which is double what they're cutting from the libraries. So we need to go back and challenge the fundamental questions of why they're choosing to cut services for the most vulnerable in Croydon while still paying inflated salaries to people who are quite well off. Thank you very much. So we need to, challenge the basic assumption that you cut libraries, because we have to defend public services. This is a temporary situation. It's not, so we shouldn't be making a permanent closure of a library. People have discussed the cuts that the Conservatives have made to local authorities. We'll rectify that when we get a sensible government in place. Similarly, Labour have messed up the finances, and it will take a couple of years to sort that out, but it's still a temporary situation. We shouldn't be making permanent changes to the library service. This is a vital service, as you've discussed so eloquently, in terms of how vital this is to the community. So we should be defending that. In terms of the question, if it did close, Green Party's sort of power from the bottom up. We've seen during coronavirus, the wonderful mutual aid groups, the way the community have come together to support each other. And so that's the route we'd go through to try and find community solutions where we can bring people together, set up community hubs where we can provide Wi-Fi, sort of internet access, and those vital services that would be missing if the council go ahead and close this library. The other final point, while I'm rushing through, the consultation isn't a consultation. The consultation is asking people open questions, not giving them a few options to choose from. So this idea that the council is consulting with the public is just complete nonsense. Giving people a few options to choose from isn't a consultation. Consultation is asking, how do we deal with this? And I would say, as I said in the first point, part of first response would be, you don't cut libraries because they're vital. You can find other areas to cut which aren't vital, and there's plenty of slack in the council budgets. Having worked in civil service at European and national level, and quick skim through, it's quite easy to spot areas where we don't need to be cutting libraries. So that would be my first point.
Right. Okay, thank you very much. I think there's quite a lot of lively conversation and questions coming through on the chat. So I want to wrap this up now and pass it over to the public to question you all. I would just say one thing about the consultation. It is very much of a tick box exercise that's being done because it's a statutory obligation. The council can't close a library without having a consultation. And the time frame, everything about the time frame suggests that some of the options were never serious in the first place. So for instance, if you look at the option to have community, the council asked the public, the community, for community run proposals that are cost neutral, by which they mean cost nothing, cost zero. That's not a serious option. It's not a serious proposal. The council have now reached the end of phase 1 of the consultation, and they did a new option, which is outsourcing, which wasn't consulted on in an open and transparent way in the first phase. And they are now I understand, talking to GLL as a potential outsourcer and maybe others, and costing that option. What does costing that option mean? It means seeing if GLL will do a contract that makes sufficient cuts while still making money themselves. So it's effectively another way of cutting services. So we're very skeptical about this consultation. We've put in what we consider to be essentially, we want the library to remain open with the support of as a public service, with the support of active and determined group. But we've put in a proposal that we feel is honourable and potentially deliverable. But that's very much of a two-way street. The council would have to want to deliver it. The council would have to commit to the service. So, so I'm going to wrap up here and go back to Jacob to chair it.
Thank you,
and
Mary.
to take questions from the public.
Thank you very much, Mary, and thank you very much, candidates, for answering all of Mary's questions. We have had a lot of lively chat of questions in the chat box, so I'm going to run through some of them. Some of them I'll put to you directly because people have asked me to do so. Others I'll ask the people to be unmuted so they can put their questions directly to you. Some are questions for everyone and some will come to others first, but if you feel like you really want to make a point on a particular question, please feel free to raise your hand either physically or via the little icon. I'll keep an eye on the screen. So our first question really relates to the proposal that that the Friends of South Norwood Library put forward, and it comes from well, sort of interpreting Ed Clark's question. What will the council do or what would you do to make sure that the proposal we've put forward is considered by the council amongst the four options? And I think I'd like to go to Angela first with that one, and then if others want to come in on that, please put up your hands. So Angela, are you able to, can we unmute Angela?
Yeah, I think I'm unmuted now.
Cool, excellent.
So you want to know how we're going to support the proposal if we have to fund the library?
No, how would you make sure our proposal is considered by the broader council? How would you get it on the table?
Well, I mean, the main message for our party is that we're one voice for the community. So I think it's quite clear from the campaigning and obviously from this group as well, that everybody wants to see the library very much stay open. So it would be, you know, it's in everyone's interest to kind of work together to find the solutions. So being the one voice for the community, we would fight tooth and nail to make sure that we are heard and to make sure, you know, that what we want is actually, you know, going to come into fruition, because effectively it is going to affect our disadvantaged, you know, community, and it's not right. And we've also got a high percentage of Black and ethnic minority in the community as well. So we need to look after everybody. We are all human, and I'm also an advocate for human rights. So we need to ensure that everyone is treated equally across the borough. So we would fight tooth and nail. And as Marcus Rashford had to get involved when the school meals were cut, you know, we have influencers behind us too. So we can make plenty of noise to ensure that we're heard.
Thank you, Angela. I'm going to come to Mike next, as we've got a flurry of hands gone up. So Mike Bonello. Just asking you to unmute.
Can you hear me now, please?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Mike.
So the question is about what should happen to, what would I do to ensure that your consultation was considered?
Your proposal considered, yeah.
So I mean, the fact that there's been a consultation, you know, I don't wish to be seen to be patting anybody on the head. I wish to speak positively about the work that the Friends of South Norwood Library are doing. I accept that I would wish to live in a world in which the people you were not needed to do what you're doing. You've invested time and energy, and you know, I'd like to acknowledge that and say that on that basis there is merit in your proposal being put forward. You're expressing yourselves forcefully. You have held a hustings to enable us to be able to speak to you. That demonstrates the strength of feeling that has meant that we're all here. And on that basis, clearly you're a serious group, and your proposals, which have merit in them, and I've looked at, and I would hope we've got 4 proposals, and clearly some are unacceptable, and that it's a strong document to move forward, I think. So what I would do if I'm successful in the Labour candidate, the Labour councillor for Woodside, I would speak to the Labour group about the consultation moving forward, because your campaign deserves that. And as I've said, there's good stuff in it, but it's necessary that it was interesting. The point I wanted to make was, it was interesting. We heard earlier about the young person sitting outside the library accessing Wi-Fi out of hours. I don't want to get political about this. I supported Sarah Jones, our MP, at the last election, as Labour stood on a platform of universal Wi-Fi for everyone, and we were derided. This is the Tory impact of Tory Britain. That's what we're living under, I think. But I don't want to go off topic. And acknowledge the work that you've done.
On that note, Mike, I think we might come to Sonia. You just had a poke at the Conservatives. Sonia, what would you do to make sure our proposal was heard?
First and foremost, I would be speaking to all the councils involved have involved thus far. I would note, I've gone through the consultation, and I've gone through some of the criticisms of the consultation as well. I myself was heavily involved with the LTN consultation in South Norwood, and that was very much a tick box exercise, and I was the lawyer that had to take that to court. So I would very much be looking at where the inadequacies were in this consultation, and whether there is any remit or any legal recourse, because I think Alison made a good point. Croydon Council do follow their statutory obligations, but I'm not so sure that they follow them to the letter of the law. So quite frankly, the position with South Norwood LTNs was they wouldn't have been removed but for our legal case. And perhaps Croydon Council needs to take account of their decisions and their consultation a bit more carefully. So that's my position on this.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm going to come to Alison Johnson next. Just waiting patiently.
Thank you. Yeah, Sonia, I think I'm definitely in line with your thinking. I think first and foremost, the priority for somebody, whoever is elected, will be to get themselves onto the appropriate committee that's going to discuss this thing. Let's stop messing about here and sort of saying all the other things and about whose fault it is. This is where we're at. So it would be to get onto the correct committee and to make this as a priority. And if it needs to be, as I said, there is always the backdrop to look at, have the I's been dotted and have the T's been crossed? And I would suggest they haven't. And much as like when I sat on Croydon fostering panel for Croydon Council for many years, you learn how to read through a lot of paperwork and make sense of what's been done correctly and what hasn't. And much like anybody on here who's also been a governor, you've got to understand that councils can be held to account. And it's not just a few voices flying in the wind, that actually there's force here and that action will be taken if necessary. So definitely if I'm elected, this would be, as I said, libraries for me. I put a quote up earlier about Carnegie. I'm very much into the whole, even the global illiteracy issue is something, and to think that here we are in the 21st century in Croydon, I think it's a real crying shame. So for me, it would definitely be a pet subject to hold on to. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I'm going to run through the remaining hands of this question and then move on to just getting ready for the next question. Is going to be John Hickman will bring in after we've heard from the final 4. So I'm going to come to Andrew next, then Louis, then Ria, then Michelle. So Andrew, please.
Okay, following on from that, unfortunately, none of us will be on the correct committee, because that committee that makes that decision will be the cabinet, and the pink and blue papers have already been released, so we know who the cabinet members are. I think the big thing for this is to work cross-party, to put pressure on both Hamida and Oliver as the leader of the council and the cabinet member responsible. So there's got to be some cross-party working. There's got to be some heavy and very quick and effective lobbying to get your proposal on the table, so it can be considered by the cabinet. It needs a sort of an experienced voice in the town hall to do that lobbying. I'd also look at how we can bring in DCMS as well, central government, because obviously councils have are meant to inform the DCMS if they're proposing to make changes to their library service. And I was just looking online, it says councils have freedom to design their library service based on their analysis and assessment of local needs. And I think if you did an assessment and analysis of local needs, you'll see that the need is to keep the library open. But a big thing that hasn't been mentioned that I would say is looking at Joanne's case, as you mentioned, closing libraries and closing other services like this is actually a false economy. There's I've worked sort of in the autism field, and if you put in light touch services early on, you can stop people falling into crisis. Now, obviously, that is better for the person, but in the long run, it's better financially for the council, because if you let people fall into crisis, you're then putting in huge, costly crisis services. So that needs to be argued as well.
Thank you, Andrew. Louis.
In terms of how we'll make sure your proposals are fully considered, I've already spoken with Oliver Lewis, who's a cabinet member for Culture and Regeneration, and he has agreed to meet with you, and along with myself as a candidate and South Norwood councillors. And I'm very happy to action that, and perhaps we can arrange for us to meet at some point next week. So a big part of this is actually having access, and a big part of my politics is that communities and residents need to have a say in the decision-making process. You can't have a patriarchal kind of council that thinks it's no best. Residents know best. So I'm more than happy to action that for you and work with you so that your proposal is fully considered, and Oliver has committed to that as well, and it's on record now.
Thank you, Louis. Ria.
I mean, a lot of what everyone's been saying has been really, really important, and kind of this proposal is really good, and pushing for it to be heard is really important in terms of kind of working cross-party, as it's already been said. But more broadly, I think that the way that council kind of conducts consultations need to be re-looked at. I mean, this was done online. Many people aren't aware of consultations. Community groups need to be consulted, and the council needs to take all of this into consideration. Lots of people in the community don't know that the consultations are happening and how to even fill them out. I mean, if they're being done online, and what if you don't have access to Wi-Fi or a computer or a phone? And it creates this whole circular issue, and the people who need libraries most or need public services most aren't being heard. And kind of it comes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of funding public services well early on, in terms of, kind of prevention, but also to create a good community that has good well-being and kind of like doesn't fall into crisis as it currently is.
Thank you, Ria. And last but by no means least, Michelle.
Thank you, Jake. So firstly, I'd like to point out that from where I stand, Woodside has a democratic deficit in the last 7 years, given all three councillors were cabinet members. This cabinet came first, residents came second. Therefore, I would change that by being outside that bubble, which is in power. And then if you have someone on the outside who isn't influenced by these party political decisions, they're the ones who can push the need of the residents, and they're the ones who put the residents first. Secondly, I'm experienced in lobbying. I've done lobbying in Uganda with the UN. I've done lobbying at UCL, even though it's really annoying and you deal with so many bureaucrats. And I do lobbying in my local party for a number of things. I know how to work around the bureaucracy and around the different levels of power. And also I know how to involve different groups. It's not just the community that needs to be consulted, it's the local schools, because so many schools have children from disadvantaged families. I feel like they're being completely ignored. They don't know about the consultations. Has Harris South Norwood even been asked about this? I don't think they have. So it's involving the local schools as well, because they will be a key player in keeping these libraries open. And then lastly, I don't think the consultations should be online. I don't think we should be hiding behind a wall of the internet. They should be in public town hall style meetings. We can book out local schools to do this. And I think the people's voices should literally be heard in person. And I believe I'll be the perfect person to do that because I love chairing meetings and I don't mind being heckled. So yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
Listen to people, but listen in person.
Thank you. So is John ready? John Hickman ready to ask his question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I come at this having had a decade of experience at planning meetings, making representations for the North Croydon Conservation Area and for Norwood Society. Can I say, given South Norwood is amongst the top 5 most deprived wards in the borough, and that it has been repeatedly pillaged and subject to loss over very many years, where does your moral conscience lie regarding the possible loss of South Norwood Library? Is it with the people who elect you or with your party?
And John, who would you like to put that to?
I'd like to put that to all of the candidates, please.
All of the candidates, right. Well, we'll take the first couple of hands up because we've got a lot of questions to get through. So the first hand to go up is from Peter Underwood. So yeah. Peter.
I completely believe in democracy. Therefore, I've always said, if you elect me, I'm there to represent you, not to govern over you. The other key thing in the Green Party is we don't have what's known as a whipping system. We don't have to follow party lines. It's for individual members to represent the people who elected them. So unlike Labour, Tory, Lib Dems, where they'll be told what to do by their parties, we won't be. We'll be there. We have freedom to represent your voices on the council. The whole reason I got into politics is because I care about representing people. Having worked in the civil service and seen the attitudes from central government and the whole detachment from the reality of everyday people's lives, that's why I've got into politics, is to repair that and try and make sure that people's voices are heard in council chambers or Westminster or wherever. It's because if we're a democracy, that's how it should happen. And unfortunately, at the moment in Croydon, we've got a lazy system where Labour rely on you voting for them in certain areas, and the Tories just sit back and wait for Labour to make enough mistakes and they'll think they'll get in. And actually, we need to shake that system up. And so that's why I think it's important that we get Greens elected at this election, because it's showing the other parties they can't just rely on the vote. If you vote for Labour or Tory, they'll just carry on the same as they always have done. If you vote for the same old parties, you get the same old politics. So that's why it's vitally important you vote for somebody different. And I would say the Green Party, we have a track record. You can see our councillors, Pete Elliott in Gypsy Hill, community champion. You know, we've got councillors all over London, all over the country doing that work. Because this is what Green Party councillors do.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to come to Angela and then Sonia.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question from Mr. Hickman. It was lovely to meet you on Saturday. Of course, as I stressed earlier, we are about the people at taking the initiative. And, you know, I think what's important to remember, like echoing what the Green Party has said, is that we need something new. We need change around here. If we keep on doing the same thing, we can't expect a different result. You know, we've been overpromised and underdelivered by these parties, you know, historically. So it's time for change. So, you know, put your faith in taking the initiative, because we actually are for the people, and, you know, we will be fighting for what the people actually want, you know, as opposed to looking out for other interests, as, you know, some of these parties do. And I think also another kind of white elephant in the room is where, you know, how has Croydon got into so much debt exactly? You know, how have we got into £1.5 billion worth of debt? I think that seriously needs to be looked at, because I don't think it's money mismanagement.
Thank you. So I'm going to Sonia, Mike and Andrew, and we'll cut it there and move to the next question, if that's all right. Sonia, thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's a really good question. I mean, I started my career in criminal defence, so I to say I have a moral compass, I really have spent my career looking at people in all walks of life who've got in trouble, from children who got on the wrong side of the law through to a lot more serious offences. I've obviously now gone into prosecuting and compensating the victims of financial crime. But crucially, the issues in South Nord have been so bad. It's actually one of the reasons I'm putting myself up for candidacy. Apart from how badly I think the LTNs were dealt with, the issues around Regina Road, I went to visit some of those people on Saturday, and truly, I can't believe that's been allowed to go on for so long. I mean, the people I spoke to have been complaining for 2 years. So to say there's been an issue with Croydon Labour would probably be an understatement here. And more than that, I mean, whilst I agree with some of the things that Peter has said, I think there is time for change, and I would argue that the Tories are a completely different approach to this. And for example, Pat Ryan is a great councillor. He's a Labour councillor. He supported the people, and when he supported the people in a certain way with the road closures, he was silenced and he was removed from committees. So I would argue that it is time for change, and I would argue it's time for someone who has a lot of experience of working with people from all walks of life. And truly, I think the library is a massive resource to the area, and it can only help support people develop further and get further in life. So I completely.
Thank you. Mike, then Andrew, and then we're going to go to, after that, a question from Lynn Chambers. So Lynn, be ready. Thank you. Mike, you're on mute.
Sorry.
That's all right.
John, your question related to who as a councillor would any of us be to primarily serve, I suppose, the people who elected us or the Labour group. And that is, the answer to that is that, I'm standing here before you in terms of expressing what I think, and you would give me your mandate to serve what it is that I stand here today to be elected on. And I'm saying to you that it is necessary, in my view, that South Norwood, and by South Norwood I mean both Woodside and South Norwood together, I think broadly we're seen as a single area. So it's necessary we keep a library service, and it's necessary that we make the saving that we need to make. And we've got a valuable contribution, we've got 4 valuable contributions. We shouldn't repeat everything over, but this is a result of where we're at. I mean, as Conservatives are doing in terms of the austerity agenda. So we need to send a strong voice to this government, because it's them that's doing it. Voting Sadiq Khan, voting for Mayor, voting Patsy Cummings, because that is what is going to do. We are here because of austerity, and we've got to fight this government. We are here because at the last election, the Tories did this to us. We've got to fight them. They're ordinary working people are being impacted directly by the policies of this government. In this election, we've got to stand in opposition to everything they're doing. If we had a Labour government now, we would not be here today. That must be accepted. We are here as a result of what this Tory central government is doing to working class communities. This is I don't mean to go on.
Thank you, Mike. We'll finally hear from Andrew on this question, and then we'll move to Lynn. So Andrew, final word on it.
I think the whips are, as I know from being a former Labour councillor, the whips are very powerful. I would just pull Peter up. If elected as a Liberal Democrat, I will not be told what to do by a Liberal Democrat whip. I mean, even if we win all 5 by-elections, we're only going to have a group of 5. Because I've proved that when I was an Ashburton councillor, I opposed a brick-by-brick planning application in the Ashburton ward. So I think what we need a bit of grown-up politics. We need to not think that we're in an edition of the West Wing or the thick of it, and have a bit of cross-party working. My 4 years on the council, the best committee I served on was the Children and Young People Scrutiny Committee, and it worked really well, because when we walked into a committee meeting, we left our party political hats at the door. I sat next to another couple of Tory councillors either side of me, and we were there to get the best for the children and young people in Croydon. So I think we need to sort of try and put party politics aside. If elected, I would make my decisions, I would make my representations, and my votes would be for my residents. And I've proved that when I was a councillor in Ashburton. I opposed some of the things that the then the party that I was a member of wanted to do.
Thank you, Andrew. Lynn, are you ready to ask your question?
I am, thank you. My question is directed to Louis, and I just wanted to kind of raise the issue of the Brick by Brick site on Station Road currently holds a window full of marketing about a new library that's coming soon. And I just wanted to ask your opinion on what you felt around the false advertising that's now standing front and centre, and the lack of honesty that's being kind of communicated with the local community en masse about the library situation.
Thank you, Lynn. Louis.
Harrison. That sign, I don't know what's going on there. I don't know why that's still there. And the best way to get results within your community is by being open, honest, and transparent with your residents. And that's as honest an answer I can give you. I don't know what else to say to that.
Thank you, Louis. Peter's got his hand up. Peter, would you like to come in on that?
I think this comes back to an issue we haven't really touched on, which is where I think my experience in the civil service will be useful. The problems at Croydon Council have also been caused by the fact that the councillors are not informed properly, don't understand what they're doing, and don't know how to control the officials that end up making all the decisions and running the council. And so things like that advertising still being up, even though the council have announced they're not going to open it, is a classic case of they're just not managing the processes properly. The council isn't being managed properly. And this is one of the things where, personally, I think my experience of having been a civil servant and worked in Parliament, and also having a master's in business administration, I can look at things from different perspectives. And it's about challenging the officials, which I think is something that councillors don't do. They just accept what they're told because they don't know any better. And actually, you need somebody in there who's going to be asking the awkward questions and making sure that the civil servants do what they're supposed to do. I say I've been a civil servant, I'm not anti-civil servant, but I think you do need to have somebody there who knows how to keep them in line and make sure they're doing what they're supposed to do. Whereas unfortunately at Croydon, we've had a problem of particularly senior managers thinking they run the show and making the decisions.
Thank you, Peter. Mike?
So the question was about, there's certainly an insensitivity about the posters being left up in South Norwood. Those feelings are sincerely felt by all of us, and it is right that it would be better that they weren't there. I think it needs to come against the backdrop. What I don't want to hear is kind of, I think it is, we need to remember that the result of this is an action that has not happened by anyone, but it's a result of our council workers, our hard-working council workers and their council teams being stretched to having their teams slashed inside, needing their size, needing to undertake the same tasks as the volume of tasks, but on a significantly lower budget. It is right that those posters shouldn't be there. But at the end of it is a hard-pushed, local authority worker who is existing in where we're at the moment. Your consultation is interesting. It speaks about the old library, and for me, I love that building. I think it's so beautiful. Each time I pass it on a bus, it would be a tragedy if it didn't exist in its current form. I think it's there's merits into what you've said. Equally, we must be mindful of how people are feeling in relation to what's happened. So I think it's right that if there's upset within the community, that the promotion, or the, I don't know, just if people are feeling upset, to the point of it being problematic, then it should come down. But don't be rageful. Don't be rageful against council workers. That they're working hard. It is not easy life. That's where I work. I'm child protection, social worker. I work for a local authority. It's not just my department. It is all departments are being stretched beyond imagination. And that's it really.
Thank you, Mike. Final word on this one from Andrew.
Thank you very much. I think "you're on mute" is going to be in the next edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, isn't it? I'd just like to go back to Peter's point about the councillors and officers. And I think he's got a good point there. I mean, when I first became a brand new councillor, there was some cladding on some terraced houses in my ward, and it had been done really badly. There was scaffolding up for about a year and a half. And I went to see a senior officer and said, well, what are we going to do for these people? Can we get something from the contractor to them? And he said, oh, that's never been done before. And I was like, well, I don't care if it's never been done before. And I got a goodwill payment for all the people who've had problems with their cladding. And also, I'd mentioned one of the scrutiny committees I sat on. When children who are in care run away, when they come back, they're meant to have a return home interview. And our Croydon weren't doing nearly enough. And we were talking about this in the scrutiny committee. And we were, looking at ways we could get that number up. And I said to the senior officer, right, well, let's set a target then. And you could see them thinking, hang on, I'm not used to getting challenged like that. And we set a target there in that meeting. So I think Peter makes a good point that you need sort of an experienced voice who's not afraid to challenge the senior officers, who I will say, I mean, on the whole, do the best job they can under the circumstances they are, and they really know their topic. So it is having that knowledge and just you're the officer. I'm the politician. I want you to look at this, and I don't care if we've never done it before. Let's try it.
Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to move on to the next question just because we've got a few more to get through and I'm aware of time. I'm going to merge a few together. Some people have asked me to read out. So these questions relate to the financial position. And the first part of it is the fact that it would cost more than 850,000 to refurbish the new library, and that was actually should have already been spent ready to use in 2019. So how many years full service fully serviced would the library have been if we'd had that 850,000? And what is the council going to do to get the money that was clearly wasted by brick back to fund the library service? And that links to the other question about kind of, I suppose, what other council services would you cut, or where would you find the money to bridge the funding gap to keep the library open? And that's to all councillors. Anyone want to go first? Can I check, Alison, is your hand still up from the previous question, or do you want to go first on this?
Yeah, it was up from the previous question, but I'll just jump in real quick if that's okay. But just to make a couple of just quick points. First thing is, having, as I said, sat as chair of governors at a school in the north of the borough, there were funding issues there and about mismanagement, etc. And what I was going to say is that one of the things that nobody's mentioned tonight is sometimes tough decisions do have to get made. And what people appreciate and what builds trust is when there's actually honesty and transparency. So shying away, as I said, I'm not going to get drawn into the semantics of tonight, but some of the comments that are being made, it's no good throwing rocks and stones. We just got to look positively forward. And if people know, as in your group, know that your proposal has been regarded and has been looked at, it's not just a tick box exercise, that builds trust. Secondly, about the money, I think that there should be definitely a challenge to the council as to the accountability of brick by brick. I've heard that there are some, I don't know the how authentic it is, but there seems to be some discussions around still giving money to brick by brick so they can finish off work. And I think that absolutely as a party, we would challenge that decision and really want to know where what it's being fed by, and why would we give more money or allow more money to go to someone like brick by brick, when in fact it could be used to take care of even the old South Norwood building and bring that back into use whilst the new building's funding structure was being reconsidered, because that one of those buildings needs to open. So I would suggest that for our party, the priority would be to look at the old building, get a review of those costs, as my colleague Angela said, and to make sure they're not overinflated, and get that functional. with the council being held responsible to keep that public service going. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go to Andrew and then Peter on this question. Sorry, just to say thank you to Saz and Carolyn for putting these points forward. So thank you to you two.
I think looking at the financial side, I'll just make one point because I know we're pushed for time and you want to get as many people in as possible. We need a complete rethink about services. Too many services come in when people are in crisis. Very expensive services when people are in crisis, and we are not putting in enough services up front that are very difficult to then put on a balance sheet of, if we put in this service that costs us X amount, we're actually going to save more money further down the line. So I think we need a complete rethink about how we prioritize services and looking at getting services in early to stop people falling into crisis. And libraries are paramount to this. They're one of the pillars of that.
Thank you, Andrew. So Peter, and then I will actually allow Louis as the last question on this one. Mike, sorry, we'll move on to the next question before you. So Peter, then Louis.
I think one of the things that came to mind with this is the idea of a people's audit. That was conducted in Lambeth, where it's outsiders from the council who have accounting expertise, financial expertise, go through the council's accounts with a fine-tooth comb as much as they can. And they found some really interesting things in Lambeth and some brilliant savings, and where money was being wasted on all sorts of strange things. I know our Green councillors in Lambeth, who are the opposition there, have been using a lot of that information to actually start sorting out the finances, because yeah, too much of it was just being swept under the carpet and nobody really knew what was going on. So I would say what we really need to do is the same process here in Croydon, conduct a proper people's audit, and not a rushed one where you're given 2 weeks to look at it. Proper access to the accounts for independent financial people who don't necessarily come from a party political background, but they're there to actually check through those accounts and give an outside perspective and see if we can find savings in other places. As I said, I've had a quick look through and seen a couple of places, but there isn't open, transparent information available. So, and there are people far more expertise than I in accounting. It would be good to get them in to have a look at it. And so, yeah, I'm sure we could find further savings that meant we didn't need to cut services so that we can keep our vital services running.
Thank you. Louis.
My understanding is, so the original starting point for Brick by Brick was that, you know, the council's chronically underfunded by central government and we have a chronic housing shortage. So I do casework for the local MP and I see it every day. I'm constantly on the phone trying to get people outside of emergency and temporary accommodation. You see families in squalid accommodation. We have a chronic housing shortage. So the idea of Brick by Brick wasn't necessarily a bad one, because the council had was underfunded. They need to come up with a way to, as like a social enterprise kind of thing, to come up with developing property in the local area so that we can tackle the housing shortage. However, in my view, where it failed was that it wasn't open and transparent enough. And I think what could have been really effective is if you had community regeneration boards, so local communities and residents can have a say in the development decisions that take place in their community. They should have had all the funding available, made publicly available, so people can properly scrutinise it. So I think it was more of a management issue rather than the idea itself. And that the starting point was that for that was central government cuts. In terms of moving forward, so I think the council's taken a clear decision to end Brick by Brick in a way that protects existing taxpayers' interests. So where projects are near completion, they're going to follow through with that, so you don't lose your investment there. It wouldn't make sense for them to close them at that stage of the development process. I think they're also looking at either a direct sale of the company, and I think they're currently in negotiations with a buyer, and they're looking to wind down the company by October the 21st. The budget assumes, and this has been accepted by the government, the budget assumes that Brick by Brick will repay, I think, 100 million of their outstanding loans as well. So they are looking to wind it down in the most cost-effective way possible. In terms of the starting point. We can't lose sight of that, but I think there's a massive lesson to be learned. Again, it's all about openness, transparency, and that's where we should have had, we really need residents having a say in the decisions taken about their communities.
Thank you, Louis. I'm going to go to Jonathan Jackson next. Jonathan, are you able to come and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. I wasn't expecting that, Jake. Sorry. Yeah, it's just a question for all. We've heard about the value of the services. I come at things from a commercial angle. We recently got funding for a small company. I look at the library as the prestige building on the street. If you remove A, the new library, or B, the old library, you devalue the position of the high street and the catchment area around it. So you lose value in property, and you lose value in attractive rateable properties, and also new council taxpayers wanting to come into the area. So I guess my point is it feels to me there's an argument to be made that that you cannot afford to lose the library, and indeed, you know, other services around the area. So kind of to the primary candidates, what are the feelings on this argument? Do you come at things from a commercial perspective, or do you not?
And do you want to put that to a particular candidate? Sorry, Jonathan.
I think maybe Sonia and Mike and Andrew.
Okay, so Mike's got his hand up, so we'll let him go first, and then we'll go Sonia and Andrew.
I mean, the answer, Jonathan, the answer to your question is no. I don't come at it with a commercial background. My background is as a local authority social worker, and I've worked in local authorities nearly all my adult life. However, you know, I think there are various arguments that can be put forward to demonstrate the necessity of an effective library in South Norwood. You know, I would seek to put forward the one I tried to describe earlier. From a social care perspective, you've put forward a strong argument from your commercial perspective, and it is clear that you know, the necessity for South Norwood area to have a library is demonstrated by the fact that there are so many arguments in its favour.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Sonia?
Hi. I don't have a commercial background at all. And I take the view that a library provides an area for children to go to after school for their schooling, and it can be a resource for those who wouldn't necessarily have anywhere else to go after school and could get into trouble. So I come at this from a completely beneficial side to the community, that this is a resource. It was always envisaged that the high street needed a library. Otherwise a new one wouldn't have been built. So it always was in Croydon's plan, clearly, to see how much of an important part of the high street the library is. So I personally take the view that it's a really important part of our community. And I mean, I fully think that it can only bolster children's futures by staying there. So that's my perspective on this.
Thank you, Sonia. Andrew, and then Alison's going to come in, and then we'll go to our final question.
I think when the question's looking at should it be public or commercial, I think the answer is both. It's tying in the commercial sector to be part of the community that will benefit projects like this. Because let's be frank, the council have got no money. So just saying you've got to fund this and you've got to provide this service. If we're looking at pure practicalities, there isn't the money to do it, which is why I really like your proposal, that it is meeting the council halfway, that they provide the service and the community work with the building. So I'd say it's looking at how we tie in the commercial sector and the public. I mean, you tie in the commercial sector, you improve that, you are going to get more revenue in through business rates, you're going to increase jobs, and you're going to make people want to come to South Norwood and Woodside. So it needs a bit of cross-working between the commercial and the public sector.
Thank you, Andrew. And Alison.
sorry, quick, yes, thank you. I think it definitely needs to be looked at also, not just waiting on impacts on community, but from a commercial perspective. Because if you look at it, when I'm a parent, I've 4 girls and I've raised those and they've been to through the education system, etc. in Croydon. But what I want to say is when somebody's looking for a new area to move in, not only do you look at the schools, you know, the quality of the schools that are around, you also look at local provision. So you would look, and definitely library would be part of that. You would also look if there's a leisure centre and obviously the parks and green spaces that are available. So one of the things that if you take out that building sorry, I can't remember his name, sorry, that just asked the question.
Jonathan.
It's Jonathan.
Jonathan, so apologies, Jonathan. If you're right to say there's a commercial aspect to it, because if you take that out, and it would devalue the other properties around it and about the attractiveness to new people coming into that area. So I think it's essential that it's looked at from both points of view, because it has it's a commercial decision and it would have a commercial impact as well. And on properties that are already in that high street and in that vicinity as well would go down. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. So I think we've still got loads of questions, but we sort of run out of time really in terms of the discussion. And there's been so much ground covered today. But I think I am going to take the opportunity to ask one question, if I may, from me. And this one will be to all candidates. So and it should be relatively quick answers. So can you confirm how you will vote when the proposed changes are brought to a vote? Basically, are you going to vote against closures? Are you going to vote against outsourcing? Are you going to vote against reduced hours? How are you going to vote? So I don't mind who goes first. There, fastest hand in the West is Peter.
Very quick answer. The council has a statutory obligation to provide a library service, so I'll be voting against all of the options and will be insisting that the council provide a library service in all 5 libraries.
Thank you, Peter. Louis was old-fashioned and just stuck his hand up there, so we'll go to Louis next.
Sorry about that. I think before we even get to the vote, I want to get off closures even before it gets to the second phase of the consultation. And of course, we need to do everything we can to keep these libraries open.
Thank you, Louis. Mike, I think, was next, and then Angela. Mike, you're on mute.
Yeah. You know, to an extent, I'm going after Louis and possibly expressing a similar point of view. You know, as I've tried to get across through this meeting, I believe it's necessary South Norwood has a library. It is necessary we make the savings. Those two things need to square up. You know, we cannot lose our library. So I would never vote to support the library opening. In terms of which of the other options I would support, I think it's too soon to you know, form a clear view. There is merit in it. Could it be considered that there are aspects of the proposal you seek to put forward that could you know, you've spoken about a joint partnership with a local authority, but were it to be a different organisation that was providing what you have described as seeking to work with us, then there are many alternatives. It's too soon to be able to say which one I will vote for, but you know, I repeat, I will not you know, support the library remaining, the library closing.
Thank you, Mike. Angela.
Yeah, we are fully in support of all of the options. Again, the 1964 legislation does state that the council has an obligation to provide a comprehensive and efficient service to the community. So with that being said, we definitely do. And I think we have to be mindful of not falling into the trap of, you know, we were promised prior to the last elections that the libraries were going to remain open, and here we are in this situation here. So, you know, we need to kind of, again, look for change.
Thank you, Angela. Sonia, then Andrew.
I would vote to save the library. I don't particularly like the options on the table. Reducing hours and outsourcing aren't appropriate, so I'd vote to save the library.
Thank you, Sonia. Andrew.
There we go. That's the right button. The decision will be made by cabinet, so none of us will actually get a vote because none of us will be in the cabinet, whoever is elected. So what we need to do is, as I said, some very quick lobbying to get your proposal into the cabinet papers, so the cabinet have that option, and then lobbying the cabinet members to make sure that that option goes through. In my experience, unfortunately, by the time things get to a vote in either cabinet or full council, the decision has already been made. So we need to make the changes before that decision has been made, and a lot of the time that is before the vote, unfortunately.
Thank you, Andrew. Michelle.
I actually agree with Andrew. Wow, lived down with Corey's agreeing. And I'll also say what's really important here is a proper consultation. I don't, as Sonia said, I don't like the options they presented to us on the table. We need a proper consultation involving all the key voices in the community first before having a vote on this, because it's not good enough what they're offering at the moment. And I'll make sure, do my best to try and save this library as well.
Thank you, Michelle. I'm going to go to Ria and Alison for your responses on that question. Which way would you vote or suppose lobby, depending on the options, against the options on the table?
I mean, of course, if I could vote, I'd vote against closure, reducing hours and outsourcing. I do everything I can to save South Norwood Library if I am elected, as well as the other 4 libraries, kind of by whatever means is necessary through lobbying. Yeah, I mean, the libraries all need to be saved.
Thank you, Ria. And Alison.
Thank you. Lobbying would take the priority given the position and timeline that we're on. If it did come down to a so-called vote, I would vote against all of the 4 options being proposed by the council. And actually, again, I'm going to reiterate, look to potentially a legal intervention to ensure that this process, as I said, was paused while other action was able to take place. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for your responses this evening. And thank you everyone for taking part in the chat and asking your questions. So many questions coming in, so it's been really lively. So thank you. I hope you've all appreciated the opportunity to hear what our candidates have got to say. And I believe that we've got another slide to bring up, which its principal message is 6th of May. There's an election. I think all the candidates would appreciate me saying, reminding you to go out and vote, exercise your democratic right. And you can see our little image there, that there's the kind of blanked out councillor spot ready for one of the individuals on the screen to join, or 2 of them. So please don't forget to vote on the 6th of May based on what you've heard this evening. And please continue to sign up to the newsletter and follow us on social media. Remember, every Saturday we're outside the library doing our read-in protest. Let's keep the momentum going, folks, and thank you very much for taking part this evening. So I will wish you all a good evening, and we shall call it an end there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night.